There comes a moment in every life when the smallest word becomes the hardest to say. No, a word that holds so much weight, yet often gets stuck in our throat. Not because we don't feel it, because we've been conditioned to silence it. We grow up learning that being good means being agreeable. That kindness means compliance. That love is proven through self-sacrifice. So we become fluent in yes. In pleasing and accommodating and absorbing more than we were ever meant to carry. We forget that every I yes is not free. It costs us something. Our time, our energy, our emotional bandwidth, our sense of self. There is a quiet kind of courage in saying no, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but transforms your life from the inside out. Many of us were taught that our worth is tied to how much we can give, how available we can be, and how often we can put ourselves second so someone else can be first. We learn to equate selflessness with goodness, and we carried that belief into adulthood like a badge of honor, until the weight of constantly saying yes began to crush us. Yet the moment we begin honoring our limits, the moment we pause and listen to what our inner world is telling us, we discover a truth we were never taught. A graceful no is one of the deepest expressions of self-respect. Self-respect is not grand or dramatic. It shows itself quietly in the choices we make about where we spend our time, who we allow to have our energy, and what we permit ourselves to carry. A graceful no is a boundary drawn with intention. It is the acknowledgement that your well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. When you say no to something that drains you, you're saying yes to your mental clarity, your emotional health, and your ability to show up authentically in the moments that truly matter. There is a common fear that saying no will make people think less of us. We worry that we will disappoint, be misunderstood, or be perceived as selfish. But the truth is that constantly saying yes out of fear doesn't make you reliable, it makes you invisible. You disappear behind commitments you don't have the capacity for, obligations you didn't choose freely, and expectations you never agreed to carry. Over time, resentment builds. Exhaustion becomes a constant companion. You begin to lose pieces of yourself in the name of pleasing others. A graceful no brings you back to yourself. It's a way of saying, I matter, my needs matters, my peace not cold, dismissive, or harsh. It is calm, honest, and rooted in integrity. You're not rejecting people. You're honoring your truth. And ironically, the people who truly value you don't pull away when you say no. They appreciate your clarity because it shows you're engaging with them honestly, not out of obligation or guilt. When you give yourself permission to use a graceful no, you start living with more intention. You stop scattering your energy and begin investing it where it actually counts. You learn that your capacity is not limitless, and that is not a flaw. It is part of being human. A respectful no is a form of emotional maturity. It teaches others how to treat you, and it teaches you how to treat yourself. In the end, a graceful no isn't just about turning something down. It's about turning toward a healthier, more aligned version of your life. It's about reclaiming your boundaries, your identity, and your inner peace. Saying no is not a rejection of others. It is an affirmation of yourself. People-pleasing often begins with good intentions. You want to be helpful, supportive, and kind. You want people to feel valued and cared for. But somewhere along the way, the desire to be helpful turns into a pattern of self-abandonment. You start saying yes when everything inside you says no. You show up when you're exhausted, agree when you're uncomfortable, and give more than you have because you believe maintaining the relationship depends on your ability to keep everyone else happy. And while it may look like generosity on the surface, underneath it quietly erodes the very connection you're trying to protect. Authentic connection requires truth, your truth. It requires honesty about your limits, your needs, your feelings, and your desires. But people-pleasing replaces honesty with performance. You put on a version of yourself that you think will be accepted, appreciated, or least likely to cause conflict. You smile when you're hurting. You agree when your heart pulls in another direction. You pretend something doesn't bother you when it absolutely does. The relationship becomes built not on who you are, but on who you think the other person wants you to be. And connection built on pretending cannot sustain itself. When you constantly say yes to avoid disappointing others, you begin to disappear within the relationship. The other person may think things are perfectly fine, but only because they're offloading their needs onto a version of you who never speaks up, never pushes back, and never expresses your genuine feelings. Slowly, resentment builds. You start feeling unseen, unappreciated, taken for granted, not because the other person is intentionally hurting you, because they cannot read needs you never voice. The gap between you widens not from conflict, but from silence. People-pleasing also teaches others to connect with a false version of you. They learn to expect your yes, your compliance, your emotional availability, because that's all you've ever given them. They believe they know you, but they don't. They know the mask you've been wearing, and deep down, you know they don't know the real you, which makes the connection feel even more fragile. Authenticity becomes a risk you're too afraid to take, and the relationship becomes a space where you cannot fully exist. True closeness requires vulnerability, the willingness to be seen as you are. It requires the courage to say, this doesn't work for me, or I need something different, or I can't do that right now. These aren't words that break connection, they strengthen it. They give others a chance to meet the real you instead of the polished version you've been performing. They invite honesty instead of obligation and trust instead of fear. When you stop people pleasing, you don't become less kind, you become more real. And being real is what allows relationships to deepen, grow, and thrive. Authentic connection cannot live where one person is constantly betraying themselves for the comfort of others. But it flourishes when both people show up honestly, imperfections and all. The moment you choose truth over pleasing is the moment true connection becomes possible. Many people grow up believing that boundaries are walls, barriers that keep others out or push people away. Because of that, setting limits can feel uncomfortable, even frightening, as if saying, I can't do this, or if this doesn't work for me, might fracture the relationship. But in reality, boundaries are not evidence of distance, they are evidence of care. They strengthen relationships by bringing clarity, honesty, and respect in every interaction. Without them, even the closest bonds struggle to thrive. Healthy relationships rely on truth, and boundaries are one of the most honest forms of communication. They show where your emotional, mental, and physical limits lie. When you express those limits kindly but firmly, you allow the other person to actually understand you. You remove guessing, assumptions, and silent expectations. Instead of forcing someone to figure out what is too much or too little, you speak your truth directly. This clarity reduces miscommunication and prevents conflict that comes from unmet or unspoken needs. In relationships without boundaries, imbalance slowly takes root. One person may give too much while the other unintentionally takes more than they should. Resentment grows quietly in the background, often unnoticed until it spills over. You might find yourself feeling exhausted, drained, or used, not because the other person is unkind, but because you were trying to maintain closeness without revealing your limits. Without boundaries, you end up protecting the relationship at your own expense, which weakens it from the inside. Over time, you associate the relationship with stress rather than connection. When you set boundaries, you protect the relationship and yourself. You say, I want us to be connected, but I need to feel safe, respected, and whole in the process. Boundaries are a bridge, not a wall. They allow both people to show up without losing themselves. They prevent resentment, ensuring that giving is voluntary, not pressured. They ensure that kindness is genuine, not fueled by guilt or fear. One of the most surprising truths about boundaries is that they create deeper trust. When someone knows you will speak up if something doesn't feel right, they don't have to worry about hurting you accidentally. They don't have to navigate your unspoken emotions or carry the responsibility of guessing your comfort level. They can relax into the relationship, knowing honesty flows both ways. This openness makes closeness safer, less fragile, and more real. People who care about you won't leave because you set a boundary. They may need time to adjust to the new clarity, especially if they were used to you overextending yourself, but they won't disappear. Those who vanish when you begin honoring your limits reveal something important. They were attached to your compliance, not your well-being. And losing that kind of connection isn't loss, it's protection. In the end, boundaries aren't a rejection of others. They are a commitment to healthy connection. They create a space where love, respect, and honesty can breathe. They invite relationships to grow from obligation into authenticity. And they allow you to remain whole while staying close. A balance that becomes the foundation of every relationship that truly lasts. Many people avoid saying no because they associate it with conflict, rejection, or hurting someone's feelings. They imagine a firm no as something sharp or cold, something that creates distance or triggers disappointment. But this belief comes from misunderstanding the word itself. A graceful no is not harsh at all. It is simply truth expressed with clarity and respect. It is the art of being honest without being unkind and protecting your well-being without harming the relationship. At its core, a graceful no is about authenticity. When you sugarcoat your limits or hide your discomfort behind a forced yes, you're not being kind, you're being avoidant. You're avoiding the temporary discomfort of honesty and replacing it with long-term resentment, exhaustion, or emotional strain. A yes that comes from fear or guilt is far more damaging than a no that comes from truth. A graceful no allows you to speak the truth in a way that honors both you and the other person. Kindness in communication is not about saying what others want to hear. It's about saying what is real with gentleness. A graceful no might sound like, I really appreciate you thinking of me, and I don't have the capacity for this right now. Or, I care about you, but I can't take this on. These are statements rooted in respect, both for yourself and for the person you're speaking to. They show that your refusal is not a rejection of them as a person. It's simply an acknowledgement of your own emotional, mental, or physical limits. A graceful no also removes unnecessary drama from communication. Instead of over-explaining, apologizing excessively, or drowning your boundary in excuses, it offers clarity. It does not defend itself. It does not twist itself into knots trying to soothe every possible reaction. It simply states the truth with compassion. This clarity is one of the greatest gifts you can offer a relationship because it eliminates confusion and prevents misalignment of expectations. The beauty of a graceful no is that it treats both people like adults capable of handling reality. It doesn't assume the other person will fall apart or collapse emotionally. It trusts that the relationship is strong enough to hold honesty and that the other person is strong enough to hear a limit without taking it personally. And in most cases, they are. People respond far better to authenticity than to passive compliance or silent resentment. What makes a graceful no powerful is that it preserves your integrity. When you say yes to things that stretch you beyond your capacity, you chip away at your own sense of grounding. But when you say no kindly, you reinforce your connection to yourself. You prove to yourself that your needs, your time, and your energy matter. The truth delivered with kindness is never harsh. It may be unexpected, it may require adjustment, but it does not wound. It respects everyone involved. A graceful no is not the shutting of a door. It is a moment of honest communication that keeps the relationship real, safe, and sustainable. And the more you practice it, the more you'll discover that kindness and truth were never meant to be opposites. They are strongest when they work together. So many people move through life believing that their value is measured by how much they can give, how available they can be, and how well they can hold everything together for everyone else. This belief is often learned quietly, through childhood expectations, cultural messages, or patterns of being praised for selflessness. Over time, you begin to believe that love must be earned through effort, that belonging requires sacrifice, and that your worth is tied to your ability to stretch yourself beyond your limits. But the truth is simpler and far more compassionate. You don't owe anyone an overextended version of yourself. Overextension happens slowly. It starts with one extra favor, one late-night emotional support session, one task you didn't have the bandwidth for but agreed to anyway. Soon it becomes a pattern, saying yes even when you're tired, helping even when you're depleted, listening even when your own heart feels heavy. You convince yourself that showing up for others is the right thing to do, even if you're abandoning yourself in the process. But self-sacrifice is not a sustainable foundation for connection. When you consistently give beyond your capacity, you are offering others a version of you that is tired, stressed, distracted, and emotionally thin. That's not generosity. That's depletion disguised as love. Healthy relationships do not require you to betray yourself. The people who truly care about you don't want a drained version of you. They want you whole, present, and genuine. When you overextend yourself, you build relationships based on performance and pressure rather than truth. You create expectations that are impossible to maintain and burdens that quietly grow heavier with time. Slowly, exhaustion sets in, resentment follows, and the relationship begins to feel like an obligation instead of a connection. Giving from an empty cup is not noble. It's harmful to everyone involved. When you push past your capacity repeatedly, your emotional well-being begins to fray. You lose touch with your needs, your desires, and your intuition. You start functioning on autopilot, prioritizing others while quietly drifting further away from yourself. And the more you ignore your limits, the more you teach the world to ignore them too. People can only respect boundaries they can see. If you hide your exhaustion behind constant yeses, how can anyone know you're struggling? The truth is, you don't exist to be endlessly available. You don't exist to carry more than you were meant to. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion, your burnout, or your emotional emptiness. No matter how deeply you care, no matter how much someone else might need you in the moment. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to have limits. You are allowed to put yourself first without guilt or apology. Saying no, stepping back, or taking time for yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you human. It preserves your ability to show up fully when you genuinely have the capacity. When you honor your limits, you rebuild trust with yourself. You replace overextension with authenticity and exhaustion with emotional presence. The world does not need a worn-out version of you. It needs the real you. And the real you can only exist when you allow yourself to rest and to choose what you truly have room for. Saying no is often framed as shutting a door, missing an opportunity, or letting someone down. But in reality, a thoughtful no is one of the most powerful ways to create the life you actually want. Every time you decline something that pulls you away from your values, drains your energy, or crowds your schedule, you are making space for peace, for rest, for creativity, for connection, and for the pursuits that matter most. A meaningful yes can only exist when it isn't suffocated by all the yeses you gave out of obligation, guilt, or habit. Most people don't realize how much saying yes automatically costs them. Energy is finite. Emotional bandwidth is finite. When you stretch these limited resources across too many commitments, even the opportunities you genuinely want to embrace lose their joy. You can't be fully present in a project that lights you up if you're running there straight from 3 other commitments you agreed to just to avoid disappointing someone. You can't nurture a relationship that matters deeply if you filled every spare moment with tasks you didn't have the heart to refuse. You can't grow, heal, or rest when every minute of your life is already spoken for. Saying no is not just about protecting your time. It's about protecting your capacity to live intentionally. When you say no to something that doesn't align with your priorities, you are saying yes to something that does. You create the breathing room needed for clarity. You open space for opportunities that bring joy, meaning, and a sense of purpose. You give yourself permission to focus on what truly matters rather than scattering your attention across obligations that drain you. It can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've spent years believing that your value comes from being available, accommodating, or endlessly giving, but the discomfort is temporary. What grows in its place is a deeper sense of alignment. You begin to notice that your yes carries more weight, more sincerity, more passion. The things you choose become expressions of your identity rather than responses to pressure. A meaningful yes is deliberate. It comes from a grounded place, not from fear, guilt, or urgency. It feels expansive rather than constricting. It energizes you rather than empties you. And the only way to cultivate that kind of yes is by clearing away the commitments that clutter your life with noise instead of nourishment. Saying no also strengthens your relationships. When people hear no from you, they learn to trust your yes. They know you are not agreeing out of obligation or pretense. They know your presence is genuine. Your boundaries give the relationship stability because both people can interact with honesty instead of silent resentment or hidden exhaustion. A life filled with automatic yeses leaves no room for growth. But a life shaped by intentional choices becomes a life of meaning. Every no is a small act of pruning, removing what is unnecessary so something beautiful can flourish. And when you start to honor that practice, you discover that saying no isn't a restriction. It is freedom. It is clarity. It is an invitation to build a life where your yes finally carries the weight and purpose it deserves.